Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Open Talk. The question today is: should intimate partner violence be treated like rape and sexual abuse? I have with me an excellent panel. We've just had some discussion on this, and I can't wait for all of you to share it with me. There's Mihira Sood, advocate at the Supreme Court of India, someone who's a very valiant and very loud, and I love the term loud, a fighter for justice for women, and she's done this throughout her career. And at the risk of being called troublesome again, I think I'll be using a lot of these words in air quotes today. Thank you, Mihira, for joining us. There's Supreet Singh, again, someone who's faced sexual harassment, like Pallavi Mohan, who I'll come to shortly, and use that opportunity to not just talk about herself, but to talk about women at large. She set up an NGO called Red Dot Foundation, and she's created something called a safe circle where she has women talking about these issues to each other. As we know, that's a very important thing. And we have Pallavi Mohan, survivor, activist, someone who's very vocal and very brave in coming out and talking about her journey. So thank you all very much. Mihira, I'd really like to start with you because it's the justice system that we're all talking about eventually. And we know that while it is supposed to be flawless and fair and balanced, it is not always so. And your own journey has seen you fighting that at every level, and not caring about some of the consequences which could be ugly as well. So talk a little about the journey that got you to this point where we can actually articulate these ideas today in the open. I think that in itself is a tremendous accomplishment. At least these conversations are happening in the public domain. So Mihira, do go ahead, fire away.
So, in terms of my own personal journey, gender justice was an issue that I was passionate about. It was one of the things that drove me to law school in the first place. And law school only ended up sharpening that. I had the fortune of some excellent professors there who really sharpened my interest and focus on how to go about this. And in terms of my other personal experiences, my initial experiences at the bar were not very friendly. I encountered a lot of misogyny. I faced sexual harassment myself, which I've written about, in both subtle as well as direct ways. Sometimes ways that were difficult to articulate or accuse a person of, sometimes ways that were far more direct. But either way, the legal profession is one where it's a little difficult to talk about these things and to raise these issues. It's a very conservative, hierarchical profession where you really have to kind of toe the line and not be seen as rocking the boat too much, not be seen, as you said, as a troublemaker. It's not something that senior lawyers who are very important in the profession like to see. It's not something the judges like to see. And it's not something that clients are comfortable with if they sense that you're not popular in the profession. And the legal profession is also unique in some ways because your work is not confined to your own office.
Yeah.
Right? You interact with other lawyers, either working with you, collaborating on the same matter, or opposing you, or you meet them in court every single day. So in a sense, it's as if the entire profession is your colleagues who you actually end up meeting or interacting with every day. So that makes it much more difficult to speak about these things. And even I was only really able to do it publicly when I was at much of a distance from the profession. When I was abroad doing my master's and thinking about these issues from a little bit of a distance and with a more theoretical perspective. And that's when I kind of decided I wanted to write about it.
In fact, talk a little about that, Mihira. You were saying that it was actually part of a course where you had to learn, in a sense, how to be in the shoes of the other, learn empathy.
Yeah, when I was at Columbia, I was specializing in gender justice and gender related issues, and for one of my courses, we had to write about a personal experience as part of an exercise in empathy. and cultivating that kind of sensitivity while dealing with other people and writing about other people. And so one of the exercises was to actually dig into your own past and write about an experience of your own, gender related. And that's when I decided to write about this. And it so happened that, that entire Justice Ganguly episode unfolded in India at the time. And a friend of mine who knew about what I had been through asked me if I wanted to write about it. And coincidentally, I just had. And
Right.
that's how it kind of came about. Otherwise, honestly, it may just have been something that I would have kept to myself for God knows how much longer.
Hmm.
But I was also, it helped that I was moving more towards academia. I was a little older in the profession. I was less concerned with the consequences. But it's really very difficult to do. And of course, the older and the more senior you are, the little bit more power you have, to deal with these kind of issues. So it's of course always the youngest, the junior most, the ones who don't come from lawyer families and don't have godfathers in the profession, are the ones who get preyed on the most.
Yes. And
Yeah.
you must have seen so much of that during your own career. It must have been heartbreaking, especially when you know that you can't do much. That is what this profession is. Like a lot of other professions, we've seen this across all professions.
I think the last decade has been quite remarkable in terms of the conversation on gender.
Hmm.
So it's not that I'm entirely pessimistic about what can happen, but yes, I think the legal profession is one where it's difficult to bring about change from the inside.
Right.
Uh, you know, um, I think critique from the outside perhaps might be far more effective
Hmm.
uh, than change from the inside, because it's just there are very few opportunities and avenues to do that.
Right.
Yeah, it is very difficult.
Yeah, Mihira, just one quick question, and then I'll go on to the others. And before I come back to you again, when you returned from Colombia, what was the reaction that that you had when you sort of rejoined the profession, in a sense? I wonder how your colleagues looked at you.
It wasn't just when I returned, it was in fact even when I was there. Despite the fact that I was sitting in New York, I was practically hiding in my room for, a week.
Terrible.
But yeah, it was strange. I had written in the past. I had, appeared in the media in the past on, other issues, but
Yeah.
it was strange to be the focus myself. And it was, I don't know, I think a little embarrassing.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
Um, but all things pass, and you emerge stronger and with a much more of a, I don't really care attitude.
Yeah.
And then I think it helped that, as I said, by then my career interests were much more well defined and
Right.
crystallized.
Right.
And it just turned out that I wasn't really looking for a conventional litigation career.
Right.
So I think that really helped me a lot.
Yeah. Great. So, Preet, may I come to you now? And in a sense, your experience mirrors that of Mihira, in the sense that you also did talk about your own experiences, and then you, set up this place where conversations were possible. So, talk a little about your experience.
So thanks, Kaveree. So when I was 5 years old, I'm an army kid. We had help in the family who took me to his room, unzipped himself, and made me touch his private parts. I was 28. I was on a fast track career. I was posted in London, and I faced sexual harassment by my then CEO. And I had to cut short my trip because the company didn't know how to work with him, how to react to something like this. We didn't even have a sexual harassment policy. And then I came back to India, and I joined our subsidiary, which had just recently opened. Uh, I left it because I felt that I was wrong somewhere and nobody was really listening. And I moved towards filmmaking, writing, and my partner in my NGO, who's also a good friend, Elsa, we started talking during this time when this horrific rape happened with a Delhi girl. We all know her as Nirbhaya. And, we both realized that we both have stories we've never told anyone. And even if we have, there's been no recourse. we were privileged because our family stood by us, but there's so many who don't have any privilege. And that's why when we realize that, the reason why people are not reporting sexual harassment or sexual violence for that matter is because, one, they don't know what sexual violence is, honestly. We have trivialized commenting, eve teasing so much so that it's become something which is a normal, right? People also feel flattered if they are whistled at sometimes. I mean, that's the norm now. Second is that people are scared to report. Mihira is here. Mihira has spoken about it also. She knows how the authorities treat you. There's more victim shaming and blaming, which starts from your home and goes on till the time you finally get your justice, which can be 7 years also from the time you file a report. So your harassment goes on for so long. So, which is why we realized that we wanted to bridge this gap between what was the actual reality out there and how many were actually getting reported. And so, Safe City was born, which is a place where we crowdsource data on sexual harassment in public places. The journey has been 7 years, and it's been extremely up and a downhill kind of road, because we were new to this space. We are not people social workers, or we've not studied social science. Honestly, we are corporate people. But we did this from within. The passion was so strong because we have faced this in our lives. I think that's how we made it to today. And during the last few months and during COVID, during lockdown, when we realized that domestic violence was on a spike, and both me and Elsa are counselors, and we deal with survivors of sexual harassment. We started getting calls from our very close friends that they are actually facing violence at home and they don't know what to do because children are at home, husbands are at home, there are elders at home,
Right.
various stories. And that's when we started crowdsourcing data on domestic violence also. And we opened the space that you mentioned, Safe Circle,
Yeah.
where I use yoga, meditation. I'm a yoga acharya, and my, of course, counseling experience in opening conversations with survivors of violence at home. And it's been a tremendous journey. I think even if one person comes out saying that, I'm feeling powerful, I can take a call, can you give me legal aid, that's when my job, I feel, is done. And it's ongoing, honestly.
Absolutely. I think making women aware of the fact that they can speak up and that there is hope, I think, is very important. Pallavi, may I come to you now and talk about your own journey, talk about your journey and what made you speak up against your partner's violence and your partner's abuse?
Well, my daughter had leukemia, and we had to relocate from the UAE, where we were based, back for her treatment. And there was a complete sea change in his entire behavior, which was completely just not sitting well with me at a time where I had to be constantly looking after my daughter. After all, she was undergoing chemotherapy. And as a partner, I expect you to be supportive of whatever
Yeah.
I'm doing. It is our child, after all. It is not
How
just
old
my
was,
child, it is your
how
child
old
as
was
well.
your how old was your daughter, if I
My
may ask?
At that time, she was 2 years and 4 months.
Oh, that's
So she
it.
was very, very small. Yeah, she was very, very small. And he started getting extremely abusive, violent, like, hitting me in front of his own parents. And they didn't say a word. They kept saying, it's your fault. You aren't doing whatever. And it drove me then to go see a lawyer and ask him what my options were. And he was very clear at that point of time, because he said, you have a child undergoing chemotherapy. Right now, you need to pay attention to her. She is most important to you at this point of time. So you need to put the rest of it aside, pay attention to her, finish off with her treatment, because you aren't working. You're the primary caregiver, and chemotherapy is expensive. It isn't exactly cheap. So let's just finish with her treatment, focus on her. And then when it's all over, we can then decide what you want to do. So that's exactly what I did. I made sure that my daughter finished her treatment. And in that time, I started collecting information about him and recording everything that he was doing to me, because obviously, once I got into court, I had to put forth certain data for them to, verify everything that was happening to me. So I did all of that. And when I finally did take a stand against him, he was shocked. And even at that time, he threatened me in front of policemen who were sitting in my house. He threatened me. He threatened my parents, and it was crazy. And that's the time when I decided, absolutely not. I will not be taking any more of this. And I took him straight to court. And ever since then, it's been an ongoing fight.
Right.
My daughter, luckily, is absolutely okay by the grace of God. She's 17 years old now and doing
Wow.
very well. And I've been living separately from my husband now for the past 5 years. I have an ongoing divorce case for the past 4 years. And that's how we are right now.
How do you support yourself, Pallavi?
So I do have my own savings, and
Right.
he does pay for things because there's a court order for that.
Right.
He did try to get us evicted from a house that we were living in. We live in a rented premises, so I had to run to court for that. And when I got into court, I found out that our landlady had filed a case against him where he hadn't paid rent for 7 months.
Oh.
So I have to say the judges were excellent. Once they discovered that I was completely innocent of all the wrongdoings that he was doing, they were very, very supportive. They gave me a court order saying that he had to get me a 3-bedroom house with a certain amount of rent that had to be paid. He had to pay for a lot of other things as well. They threatened him with arrest. They threatened his own lawyers with arrest. They froze his bank account to make sure that he paid up to me so that I could put down a deposit for another house. And during that time, we also found out that he was lying about his own assets. So all of that came into the forefront. So that is how we're living right now. But yes, I do a lot of freelance work myself to support myself in case he decides to disappear on me, which is extremely, extremely probable.
I can't imagine how you, tolerated that time and how you've overcome that. I think, I can only congratulate you, and I think it must have taken tremendous amount of courage to not just handle an ill child, but to handle the repeated abuse at the hands of someone whom I presume you trusted with your life and love.
Absolutely. I, in fact, left my home to marry the man. And then to get this kind of treatment from him, it was it was just not acceptable. And especially since he had got into so much trouble when we were in the Middle East. He got arrested. 18 of them got arrested. They were put into jail. I had no idea where he was. For 1 week, I didn't know if he was alive or dead till I went into the Indian consulate and asked them, please find out where my husband is. And then we found out that the criminal investigation department had got him. And that's where we found out that, he was involved in something of a huge scale. There were 18 of them who were part of a visa fraud.
Oh.
And then I had a very good lawyer who happened to be the head of Interpol for the Middle East. So he just picked up the phone and, found out exactly what he was caught for. And at that time, I also found out I was pregnant. So I didn't know what was happening. So I just told my lawyer, I said, I'm going to trust you as another human being, and you tell me what I need to do. Do I stay here or do I leave? Just pack up and leave and go back home and, just let him be on his own devices. And he told me, he said, no, please stay. I will fight your case and we will get him out. So after everything that I did for the man, to be treated the way I was, obviously, when I reached a boiling point and I decided, no way am I going to take this. But then I can't let that define the rest of my life. I have to obviously live for my children. I have to make sure that they get a really good life, irrespective of whether both the parents are part of it or not part of it. But since they're living with me, I have to do my best.
Well done. Mihira, how many times have you heard this kind of story being repeated and, people coming to you and saying, what do we do?
A lot. I think of course, lack of awareness of the options is one of the biggest problems. The law is just too too complicated and too difficult to understand for a lot of people, and there isn't as much effort from officially from official circles as there should be in terms of simplifying it and making it accessible for people. For example, a lot of people don't know that there is a Domestic Violence Act that
Yes.
alternative to approaching the criminal justice system. It provides you with civil remedies, because a lot of so if you ask me about my experience with domestic violence cases, um, some of the themes that I see again and again, one is,
Yeah.
of course, a lack of awareness of one's options.
Right.
But there's also a fear of the police,
Right.
a fear of approaching them, a fear of getting entangled with them, and not really then knowing what you're going to get into.
Yes.
And that's a big shame. And I think it's a big indictment of our law enforcement system. I mean, the police are the first level of engagement with the law enforcement system that citizens have, and
Right.
citizens should not be afraid of approaching them when they are not in the wrong.
Hmm.
But they are, and they're afraid of what the police will do. They're afraid of what this will mean. They're afraid of being harassed or inconvenienced, or the fear of any kind of backlash. Then very often women are not financially independent. Either they never have been, were never encouraged to be. They've taken a break because of their children.
Right.
So they are worried that about that if you send your husband to jail, and then what do you do financially?
Exactly.
Or you're living with your in-laws,
Yeah.
which is so common in our country, and you send your husband to jail, and then what, you're left living with his parents?
Yeah.
And that's not a happy scenario. So
Right.
there are a lot of problems with a very hard-handed kind of approach to the law, and that's one of the reasons why it was thought that maybe if we have a Domestic Violence Act that provides civil remedies,
Hmm.
that might make it easier for women to approach the law. So it will give you economic remedies, it will give you compensation, you can ask for a right to residence, ensuring that you will not be kicked out of the house. It can ensure that you retain custody of your children, because the fear of losing custody, the fear that if I take my husband to court, the first thing he's going to do, and the biggest fear for most women is the fear of losing custody of their children.
Absolutely.
Yes, that's right.
And so that's just how it is. So a lot of those things need to be taken care of before you can say go to the police. And for a lot of those things also, we need to start at a much more basic social level in terms of education, financial independence. We also need to have a very strong system of alimony. Women are afraid to seek divorce,
Right. Right.
because they'll be left with nothing. And even when alimony is given, it's very often so unrealistic.
Yeah.
It is completely disconnected from what the woman has been, kind of lifestyle that the woman or her children have been
Right.
used to do, and completely divorced from what the husband even earns or has. So a lot of these things also need to be looked at, because what is it that prevents women from going to the police? We have abysmally low reporting of domestic violence, to the point where even quoting statistics becomes a meaningless exercise.
Right.
And we need to look at all of this. We need to look at and we also need to, it doesn't occur to people naturally that you need to have a consistent testimony, or you need to preserve evidence.
Yes.
And it doesn't necessarily sit well with judges either, because there's a lot of misogyny inherent in the way judges also look at cases like this. And if you look as if you've prepared all your evidence, and if
Right.
you prepared your testimony a little too well, and it sounds a little too rehearsed,
Hmm.
um, then it makes you a little less credible as well.
Right.
But if you haven't done that, then it makes your testimony completely unbelievable. So it's a really fine line that women have to walk.
Yeah.
And honestly, it could go either way. Ultimately, it comes down to whether or not your story is one that a judge likes to hear. And
Right.
that's part of the reason, why we, in terms of legislation, and definition of offenses and amending criminal law to create new offenses, why it's important to have specific offenses to
Yeah.
reduce judicial discretion. Because, yes, of course, you have laws against dowry, you have laws against assault, you have laws against acid attacks. So, a lot of what comes under domestic violence may come under any of these. But is that sufficient? No, it's not, right? Because judges are not trained to see domestic violence cases within those parameters.
Right.
Police are not trained to see domestic violence cases within those parameters. And unless, very often we've seen, the experience has been that it's not going to be taken with that kind of seriousness, and you're not going to see those levels of conviction
Right.
that you want to see.
Right.
There's a need for specificity that maybe shouldn't be there, but there is.
Right. Mihira, a quick additional question on this: that is marital rape criminalized or is it not
Marital
still?
rape in India has not been criminalized.
Right.
It was one of the very strong recommendations of the Justice Verma Committee, which I was a part of.
Exactly.
That was
Yes.
recommendations in January of 2014, and the government rejected it for and the usual arguments against marital rape. They usually fall under two categories, neither of which makes a lot of sense. One is the fear of false cases.
Yeah.
you know and yes, marital rape can be hard to prove, but no harder than any other offense that doesn't necessarily leave DNA evidence. DNA evidence is not going to show whether or not there was consent,
Right.
right? But you can have a false complaint in any kind of offense,
Yeah.
and it could be any kind of offense that comes down to a he said, she said kind of thing. And it's really a bit of a misconception that just because there is a complaint, the guy is going to go to jail, and
Yeah.
therefore you have to be careful of creating these kind of offenses. That's not the case. The way the law works, the way evidence is looked at, the chain of circumstances that the prosecution has to create, it has to be not just it has to be a plausible story, it has to be a probable story. The requirement in criminal law to convict is that it should be a story that is so likely that it is beyond reasonable doubt.
Right.
It's not that easy to just falsely accuse somebody.
Yeah.
And the second reason that is very often given for not criminalizing marital rape is that family life is delicate.
Yes.
Courts have in fact used the literal phrase that this would be taking a bull into a china shop.
Right.
And it's the classic Indian response of
But
that
exactly.
keep this in the house, keep it
Yeah.
private. And very often privacy is just the worst thing when it comes to domestic violence. These arguments of privacy. So I think for these reasons, and the fact that judges, lawmakers, perhaps particularly of a certain generation, that they're just not accustomed to seeing marriage and family life as something that can be amenable or can sit well with concepts like equal rights.
Right. Yes. It's still seen as well. It is some form of slavery or some
Sacrifice,
form.
a compromise, you can
Yeah.
put whatever spin you like on it. Language
Adjust.
and rights just doesn't sit very well with it for a lot
Yeah.
of people.
Exactly. Pallavi, I wanted to ask you, Mihira said something very interesting about, the kind of documentary evidence that you have to prepare, which sometimes doesn't sit well with judges who think that you may have actually planned this whole thing or whatever. Did you ever face this kind of behavior, this kind of reaction from judges?
I have to say that the judges have been excellent, or maybe I was just lucky. But
Touch.
no, they have to be, no, they have been extremely impartial.
Huh.
I whatever evidence I have put in front of them has been factual.
Right.
Uh, it's all there in black and white. Of course, he's also put in evidence there in black and white. But as she has said, it is all based on them. It is all based on their judgment about what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done. And I also want to come in here and talk about the police.
Yes.
Much about what has been said about them. They have been extremely, extremely helpful.
Okay.
Not just for me, but for a lot of other ladies that I have helped. When they've been too scared to approach the police, haven't known how to do it, and I have gone with them, and they have been extremely gentle and
Right.
very, very impartial. So
Right.
I think a lot of it is to do with the thinking that we have in our society, that it's just no, how can you go and talk to the police? They'll harass you, they'll do this, they'll do that. Nothing of
Hmm.
that sort happened to me at all. It was all the opposite. In fact, they would come to me to ask me, are you okay, ma'am? Is there anything we can do for you? Please let us know. They gave me all their phone numbers. They even
Hmm.
introduced me to a lady constable, said that, if you need her to come visit at any point of time after 6 o'clock at night, she will. So I
Did
think they
you
did a brilliant job.
did you ask for that? Did you ask for that sometimes?
At well, I was yes, at one point of time when I was trying to trace my husband, when there was a case of domestic violence against him, and we couldn't reach him any way or form. So the judge was really good. So she said that if you are too scared to go meet him physically, I will send a protection officer with you. And that
Hmm.
was my first interaction with a protection officer, and she was really good. She came with me and she said, don't worry, nothing is going to happen to you. He can't touch me because I have been appointed by the court. And obviously, he will not touch you while I'm around with you. And, we stuck a notice outside his office because he was, like I said, he was absconding and not appearing in court, not responding to phone calls, WhatsApp messages, which they now, which are now admissible in court if you show the blue ticks. None of that was happening. So then she said, no, you have to physically find him. So that's what we did. We went, stuck up a notice on his office gate, and then the protection officer called him. We were lucky that he picked up the phone, and she said, I'm so and so, I've come from the court, and you have to show up in court. And now that I've spoken to you, the message has reached you, and of course, if you don't show, you have to face the consequences. So, in my case, it has all worked out very well. But yes, in all the proceedings that I have seen in the past so many years, there have been cases where I have seen a lot of other things going on, which have been completely beyond me. And I feel very sorry for those ladies because they just don't know what to do. They've never collected evidence. They don't know what evidence is. They're too scared. All they're interested in is to save themselves and their children from the regular thrashings that they get from the husband, from his family members. And I'm sure a lot of them are facing marital rape. But as Mihira said, since it's not criminalized in our country, it's not part of the act.
Hmm. So, Pallavi, in your case, did you use the Domestic Violence Act or did you use any
Yes,
other?
I
Yeah.
have, I have it, or I have a ongoing case of domestic violence still. It's
Hmm.
still going on, and
Hmm.
I have to
So,
say
have
it
you
has
found it
been.
useful? Have you found it a
I
useful
have
act?
found it. I have found it very useful because the Metropolitan Magistrate has given me a court order
Hmm.
for my residence.
Right.
So, like I said, 2 years ago, he did try to get us evicted from a house. I mean, imagine throwing a woman and her two small girls out on the street.
Hmm.
That's what he was trying to do. So I had to go to the court. I had to make sure that at least I have a place to stay and a roof over my head for me and my children. And she gave us an order for that, which is still very much in effect. And until and unless he actually settles with me on a proper divorce, I'm not. I'm no. They're gonna. I'm sure they're gonna make sure that I get what I need.
Pallavi, you keep saying she. So, I think were you lucky that you got a woman judge?
Yeah, I got a woman judge in the Metropolitan Magistrate. Then I had another judge when I had to get my house done. So that was another lady judge. But the family court was a male judge who was extremely sensitive when they were cross-examining me, asking me about various questions about my sexual relationship with my husband. When did it stop? Why did it stop? He was extremely sensitive and said, "Oh, shall I empty out the?" First of all, he made sure we only came in for questioning, at around 3:34, when most of the cases are done for the day. Then he said that, I'll empty out the courtroom for you. But I was like, no, there's really no need for it because I really don't have much to say, and none of it is spicy enough, to for anyone to be making fun of. So he was also excellent. He sat, he heard me out. There was a time when my husband wanted to take my children somewhere, and I told the judge, I said, he's not even taken my children to his own house. So he was like, it doesn't matter. If he doesn't want to take your children to the house, it doesn't matter. It's all for you. If he doesn't do the things that he keeps saying he does, when he puts it down in court, and he's put it down in his cross examination, and he completely goes against it, it's just going to help you.
Right. Supreet, I have to ask you the same question. How many times have you heard stories like Pallavi, which may not have turned out as, fortunately for the survivors as they have for Pallavi?
So, while I was hearing Mihira and Pallavi speak, I was just thinking, we have given so much of entitlement to the man in our society that culturally we have a bigger problem more than the law. The law is still there. We have remedial measures. The fact is that we are not aware of them, or we are too scared to go to that because we have so much of family and society pulling us back and shaming us. So I think there's a much more bigger solution that we have to adapt, which is at home, of educating everyone on gender and consent and respect for each other. And when I went through my separation, like Pallavi said, I was maybe lucky. I got a lady judge, and but the fact was we were doing it mutually. It was a mutual consent thing. I'm great friends with my ex-husband, and she was asking me, "You're not asking for anything." I said, "I don't want anything." "But you don't have a house, you don't have an income." I said, I'm educated. I'll earn. She said, "No, you should ask for something." I said, "No, I don't want anything." And my husband and we were laughing. I mean, now ex-husband, but there is a system. We just don't use it. We are not even aware that the judges are going to be sitting there, and they are nice and sensitive also. I know there are cases which have really faced procedures which have been extremely much more harassing than the episode itself back home. In fact, I have this particular case where this lady called me in the middle of the night. She gave me some 10 calls. I was sleeping, and then I woke up, and she said that I need to go to the cops. And I know the couple. They both are very, very close friends of mine. And I said, what happened? And so then I spoke to, because we work on domestic violence, we work with the police very, very closely. And I called the DCP, and then he arranged for somebody in that local area to meet her and all. But they still couldn't send somebody to a house, so small loopholes. The cops were brilliant. She went to the police station. She put down her complaint. But the fact is that she had 2 underage children at home, which she was scared of, that the husband's going to come back and he was violent at that time. She was almost throttled, which is why she took this step, and she had to push him out of the house. But she had to go to the cop station. I mean, that little bit of sensitivity, middle of the night, can somebody go to a victim's house where he's staying alone with the kids? And they still didn't do an FIR, even though I spoke to the DCP, I spoke to the system. They just did a complaint and sent her back and said that we will give him hadka denge agar zyada problem hua to.
That's what they usually say.
Yeah, exactly. And now it's been a while. Now she's also cooled off. The things have happened over a period of 15 years, which reached this stage. But now all of a sudden everything's cooled off, and there's a thought of maybe things can be better. Maybe it's better to let it be rather than go the legal way, because it's just so harassing to do that. The kids are going through so much of harassment. You yourself are going through so much of victimization, whether you're sitting in a police station or whether you are at home alone with the family. So so that's the kind of those are the kind of cases that I'm seeing now, where women are, one, they're very scared of and speaking up also. I mean, you look at the statistics, 31 to 32% of every woman who's in some form of relationship is facing physical or sexual violence at home. But out of them, almost 90% don't even talk about it,
Right.
you know. And out of the 10% who talk about it, only 6 to 7% actually go and ask for remedial help from the authorities.
Right.
So what is that figure? Like Mihira said, it's difficult to even think that these statistics are correct, because how many people have you surveyed to find this out? How many
Right.
women are still not saying that I was violated at home?
Right.
And so yeah, so I think what we seriously need is, we really need education of our laws. I mean, I think
Yeah.
NCW did a brilliant job over COVID talking about domestic violence on various social platforms, but why can't we do that regularly about all
Regularly.
the laws which
Right.
safeguard women in our country? you
Right.
know so important. So yeah, so I think we still have a long way to go, and starts from home, of education, changing our mindset about entitling men to privilege of control over women.
Right.
The women at home need to also stand up. And we've realized, Mihira would have also seen this, that most of these violations and most of this violence happens in families where either their education is low sometimes, or sometimes where they have seen this happening in their homes. Maybe their mother was beaten up, maybe some other woman was beaten up at their home, so it's carrying on. So we need to stop, and we need to rewire our society a little bit. So gender equality and changing these norms are extremely important, along with, of course, the multi-sectoral changes of policy and law, and actually making authorities abiding by the laws. I mean, I'll tell you a case. This is a funny case. We had a constable who went with us to a domestic violence victim's place, and she said that, I didn't know कि husband नहीं मार सकता मेरे को, मुझे पता ही नहीं था. She's a constable, lady
Right.
constable. So I mean, think about it. I mean, if a police is not aware of what their laws are, I mean, how are they going to inform them? Imagine her going without an NGO, without a social worker,
Yeah.
to a victim's place and saying, "But what's the problem? Beating is
Right.
normal." So that's the state we are in.
Absolutely. Mehra, I wanted to carry on with this idea because we're talking about educated women, fairly entitled, fairly aware. What about the mass of people who has no idea that, such laws exist and can actually be used?
I mean, it's actually quite a staggering degree of the problem is of a really staggering degree. And when you think of what the law provides, when it
Yes.
says that the Domestic Violence Act talks about different kinds of abuse: physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal and emotional abuse, economic abuse. It's, I mean, these are things that haven't even crossed the minds of most of the
Exactly.
people in this country, that this is something that is abused, this is something that the law deals with, this is something that the
Right.
law can protect you from.
Yeah.
um, you know so, and then of course there is the more tangible problem of, even if you are aware, what can you do?
Hmm.
And that's
You
that,
go
I
to.
think. Where will you go? What
Yeah.
can you do?
Yeah.
And that is, so these are constructively the things we need to work on: is legal awareness,
Right.
ensuring high realistic degree of alimony and maintenance,
Yeah.
um, working on making women across every strata of society financially and legally literate and independent.
Right.
Education. That's, I mean, that I can't say much more than that. That's where it
Absolutely.
starts.
Right.
That has to be the building block. But it's not just awareness of the law, but also, I think in my experience, what a lot of women don't have is an awareness of what they themselves are capable of.
Yes.
A sense of assertiveness and self-belief.
Right.
And that, given the way our society and our economy is structured, really can only come from education and financial independence.
Right. Have you seen any startling case of someone who's come to you and has so surprised you with her courage and conviction of what has happened to her should not happen to her again or to anyone else in her
I
position?
think what happens, I mean, the thing I've been struck by the most is the extent to which women's attitudes changed because of their children.
Right. Right.
Whether it is I will stay in this marriage and I will tolerate this abuse because I think it is best for my children, or it's best for them economically, or in terms of their physical safety, that I do this right now, or whether it is I have to leave because I cannot have my son seeing this and growing up to be that kind of man, or I cannot have my daughter seeing this and growing up to think that this is normal, or
Right.
maybe one day my husband will turn on her. You
Right.
know, it is really so much of women's actions are driven by their children and the
Right.
need to protect them, the need to bring them, whichever choice one makes. And I think that strength has always made me a little awestruck. The strength that comes from just even suffering all of this, you're constantly thinking about someone else.
Right.
Yeah, that I think has always been pretty amazing, and
Yeah.
that comes whether you choose to stay or leave. You know,
Yeah.
in both those choices, there is so often that element of doing this for my children.
Right. Pallavi,
Yeah.
would you agree with that? I think as a mother,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. I am fighting the fight for my children to make sure that they get what's due to them. Because I know their father. He's a scoundrel. He'll run away at the first sign of trouble, which is why I want him tied down properly. And I need to get what I need for my children for their future. If it was
right,
just me, I would have walked long time ago. I'm very capable of looking after myself, but I'm fighting for my children's rights because they both are minors. And it is his duty to get this done. And I have
right,
to make sure that he stands by it and gets it done. There are a lot of women, as Mihira has said, who just don't bother because there are no children. So they just stay in it and they're
right,
miserable,
right,
and they all cry, but they don't want to move because they're living this very comfortable life with all the abuse going on, and because there are no children, they're like, okay, we'll take it. It
Mihira, you
obviously it makes no sense to me.
I think
But
Mihira has something to say here. Mihira?
no, I was saying that that's really not what the point I was making.
Yeah,
The point I was making was that you were asking me about anything that I've seen in the
yeah,
cases that I've
yeah,
seen that really surprised me, and I wasn't talking about women choosing to stay because they have no kids and so or they like their life or anything like that. I was talking about whether a woman chooses to stay because it's better for her kids, or chooses to leave because it's better for her kids. I think what has constantly amazed me is the ability of women to, even within a difficult situation like that, constantly be so selfless and thinking about somebody else and
right,
putting somebody else's interests first. That's the point I was making.
right. Absolutely. Mihira, what can we do to make this kind of legal awareness more? How do we spread this legal awareness? Why don't we do more of this on social media instead of the kind of rubbish that comes on social media these days? We have a law ministry. We have a Ministry of Women and Child Development. I mean, these are all things that can be suggested to them. We have a Ministry for Law and Justice as well. And this isn't something that's very expensive to do. I mean,
No, it's not. And I think there are some efforts to, for example, introduce legal studies as subjects in school. I think maybe that could be made mandatory and start at a younger age rather than what it
right,
is right now, which is,
right,
not very popular optional subject.
right,
uh, so maybe have a little bit more of that, and maybe do it in a little bit more of a fun way, because the law
yeah,
can be really fun and interesting. It's very dramatic.
Right.
It lends itself well to, short movies, television, things like that.
Yeah.
In law school, we have these simulated trials called moot court competitions, like mock
Yeah.
trials.
But they can
Um,
be fun.
they're a lot of fun, and
Yeah.
I think that there's an inherent drama in the law that can make it very interesting for youngsters.
Exactly.
And I really do think that is something that should be capitalized on.
Absolutely. You're going to be my nominee for law minister if there's ever a change of government.
Anytime,
We all will
anytime.
nominate for you.
Yes, we will all vote for you.
Okay, so I have a few.
I had something to add to what you asked, Mihira,
Please do.
regarding how can we make this law. That's absolutely right. In the system, education system, like we've been fighting to add gender sensitivity and sex education into our education system. It's a long fight, but we are fighting. And I think this is a brilliant thing. We should add legal studies
Absolutely.
mandatorily. It's like how you have people going into army for 2 years. Which is mandatory. I mean, I think we need to have something like that here also. Like they have it in Israel, right? I mean, we need to have something on women's studies, which is mandatory for men to go through more than the women in our country.
I mean, there are several law schools that actually have gender studies now as a mandatory subject,
Yes,
and I think that's amazing.
I
Yeah.
hope we have a new generation of judges who will be a little more empathetic towards women.
No, also
There's a very
I think when it comes to talking about this, communicating the law, there are a lot of people across the world who are making extremely interesting web series
Right.
based on this, So I think we all need to consciously start making our children and our friends also watch it. I think it's important. And we are using cartoon also very importantly for law. Converting IPCs into cartoons and giving out law tunes to people. So,
In fact, we're coming towards the end of the show. I have a few questions from the audience, which I'd quickly like to put to you. The first one flows from what you just said, Supreet. Is domestic violence encouraged by films and television? Do you think so?
Yes, I think so. I think the media for the longest time has been one of the biggest influencers. Media is one of the biggest influencers. Visuals kind of tend to make you do what you see. Our heroes are portrayed as the superhuman beings, and the women are always damsel in distress who he's going to save. So clearly, anything he does thereafter is great. There are small phrases like "hasi to fussy." I mean, come on, if I'm laughing, does that mean that I'm available for you? Stuff like those. So media has been extremely influential in perpetuating a lot of violence, I feel. But I think over the last few years, like Mihira said, the last decade has been brilliant in opening conversations on gender equality. And I think a lot of the big banners in film industry are coming forward and actually saying sorry for objectifying women for the longest time. And so that's happening. And in fact, ad filmmakers are extremely gender sensitive now. So I also direct ad films, and I make sure that whatever I'm directing, I put a gender equal tone to the film, and it is very well accepted by the clients. So it's not only driven by what the creative people do. Yeah.
I
Go
think
ahead,
a lot
sorry.
of the misogyny has shifted to the news channels, Mihira. The kind of sort of public lynching we've seen of poor Riya Chakraborty sent shivers down my spine. I think the kind of objectification, the kind of vilification she's facing, but that's another debate. Would empathy-based education help? Do you think the government needs to look into it, Mihira?
I think there are already some efforts in that context. I know that the Delhi government is doing, some kind of spiritual guidance, happiness-based, curriculum and
Curriculum.
things like
Yeah.
that. I think maybe something like that. I think that the fear with that is always that it might venture into the very preachy or maybe highly moralistic kind of ground, which A becomes contentious and B frankly becomes very boring for children.
Yeah.
I think there's a way to do it that can really tap into the natural empathy that children have and the natural sense of fairness and justice that children have. But it needs to be at their level. and
Right.
need to steer away from contentious kind of moralizing.
Right. Pallavi, I'd like to put this question to you. Does the court take into consideration the psychological mental health of children who see their mother being abused? Is any remedy provided for that? Have you seen any of this in your experience?
Well, I have kept my children out of the courtroom
Okay.
completely. But yes, in all of my 4 years of going to the courts, I have seen a lot of children who are accompanying their mothers. They are traumatized a lot.
Right.
Um, if they see their fathers, or if they see their grandparents from the other side, and there's a lot of screaming going on, all of that,
Right.
it's very traumatizing. And I'm very glad that I've kept my children out of it completely. And that's something that I think all of us agreed to do, both sides, that the children will not be involved in this. Whatever happens, they will stay out.
Right. But I'm sure it's not very easy to do. The temptation to sort of,
It's not very easy to do. I Obviously, those children that are coming into court are small. The
yeah,
parents don't have anywhere to leave them.
right,
I was mostly going into court, during the time that my children had school. And
right,
if I was needed in the evenings to be in court, then I made sure they were with somebody, so they were safe. So,
right.
but like I said, a lot of people don't have that privilege, so those children had to be there, and they were very traumatized completely.
Mihira, may I ask you, one of the questions is, what are the immediate reforms in laws you would like to recommend? Would you like to recommend any changes?
I think a lot of the laws that we have are on paper very good.
Yeah.
Of course, something like the fact that marital rape there's a specific exemption, I
Hmm.
think is horrific, and should be completely abolished, that exemption. But by and large, it's not so much the laws that I think should be the focus.
Hmm.
Our laws are, there are a few things here and there, but they're all right. It's the training, the sensitization of the police and the judges, and the police being as I said, the first stage of engagement that a citizen has with law enforcement,
Right.
and the judges, but the lower court judges in particular, being the next stage, the magistrates, and the district and the sessions judges. They're the ones who are conducting the trials, and it's at that level that the sensitization, the education, on, because new laws are new for them as well.
Right.
You can't just throw a new law and expect everybody to immediately get what it's about or what the thinking behind it was. And there needs to be some sort of training, and there
Right.
needs to be ongoing police and judicial training.
Right. I think
I
the
would
point,
really much
yeah,
rather the focus stay there than on constantly creating new laws, which,
exactly.
quite frankly, is just a very easy out for politicians to say, oh, we passed this law,
Right.
and we've done so much.
Yeah.
It's much harder to do this behind the scenes work that doesn't necessarily grab the headlines, but is much more discreet, much more behind the scenes, and much more ongoing, where you'll see much more long-term results rather than, hey, presto, new legislation.
Absolutely. Supreet, related to this was the point that you had made, right? That about the woman constable who said that she wasn't even aware that the husband could actually be picked up for assaulting the wife. So
Yes.
how do you? There are two aspects to it. One coming from what Mihira said, that the police itself needs to be educated, but the second point, the question is how to make a woman realize that she's being abused, given the upbringing she's had. How does she even become aware that this is not natural? This is not a natural state of things.
So that's what I said. So we need a major cultural shift, which is not going to happen overnight, honestly. We need to open conversations. I think during COVID, one good thing which has happened is that we all are talking about this a lot. We are coming
Right.
online and speaking about domestic violence. So if only 100 women knew pre-COVID that domestic violence is a crime and punishable in our country. I think there are lack of them now who know that yes, it is. So I think conversations, opening conversations, education system where kids can go back home and when they see something happening like this, they can tell their parents this is not correct. I mean, I
Right.
think that is one big factor. People get affected by what their children say and see also.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So and there's no one solution. We need a multi-sectoral response to this. We have the laws, like Mihira has said. Pallavi is first-hand a person who has gone through the process, seen the process works as well. So we need to implement all that we have, and we need to really create a major, awareness. If I'm living in my society, of course, I work in this space now. But if everyone who is touched upon by this conversation about these acts and these laws, if they can just hold one conversation with the neighbor or their community, I mean, this is how we are going to multiply. You can't change the generation which is of our age now. You can change the coming generations, but how do you change what is already there? So that's how we will change it. I think media holds a big answer to it. Filmmakers, web series makers, they need to put out content which is responsible, gender equal content where job roles are not stereotypical to man and
Right.
woman are
Exactly.
exchanged.
Yeah.
Break the stereotypes totally. And I think it's very important that we as women, we educate ourselves. I think we don't educate ourselves. For the longest time, I thought emotional harassment in a married life is not even harassment. I didn't even realize I was getting harassed for the longest time, but
Right.
it is. So I think this is what I think will eventually help us. And of course, I think we need a lot of women representation in politics and media and these
Yes.
committees who sit and make laws.
And the judiciary.
And the judiciary, yes,
Right.
absolutely.
So my last question to all of you really is one thing that you'd like to say either to a woman who's being abused or to a police officer who has to intervene in such a case or to a judge who has to decide a case of this sort that comes to him or her. One thing that all of you would like to say should be done. Pallavi, may I start with you because I think you've intimate knowledge of courts now. I don't know how many times you must have visited the courts in the course of your journey.
Okay, first, so I would like to start with the women who are undergoing this. So, all of
Hmm.
you who are hiding, who are scared, please don't be. Don't be. We have things in place. You just need to come out there and you have to take a stand. You
Hmm.
cannot live in the hell that you're living in just because you are scared and that you think that things will not work. Everything works. Believe me, I'm living proof of it. It all works. You just have to get there and you have to get it done. It is not difficult at all. It's absolutely fine. So don't be scared. I would like to encourage you all whoever's there who's living in that kind of hell, that please come to us. We can help you. If you are too scared to go on your own. I've done a lot of this for a lot of women. Okay, after they have seen the kind of experience that I've undergone. So a lot of them have been scared, have, of course, after a lot of hesitation, approached me, and I have taken them, literally held their hands and taken them to the police station, made sure their complaints were done, have set them up with various lawyers to get them all organized, and they've just gone ahead after that on their own journey because you have to find your way. You cannot
Right.
be living that way.
Wonderful. Mihira?
I think the main thing I would say, and it may sound very trite or, easier said than done, but is empower yourself, whether it is through knowledge, whether it is through collecting and preserving evidence,
Yeah.
whether it is through, uh, getting yourself financially independent. Maybe that might mean even waiting before you file a complaint. Everybody's situation is different,
Hmm.
but get empower yourself. Find out what it takes, speak to people, find out what it takes, in terms of the law, in terms of preserving the evidence, in terms of ensuring that you are in a position to take care of your children.
Right.
you know, things like that. And then, as Pallavi said, then don't be afraid.
Absolutely. Supreet?
So I think, yes, very rightly said, educate yourself, empower yourself socially, economically, and stop justifying any form of violence under the garb of a relationship or of what has been normal and a stereotypical social norm for the longest time. So I think we all need to accept that violence is violence. There is
Right.
no relationship related or needs to come in between. To the judges and to everyone, all the authorities, I think when they wear the uniforms and sit on those chairs, they need to keep gender, their own personal biases, their culture, and their thoughts on relationships between two people between whom the violence is perpetrated. So they need to keep all of that outside that room and then take a call on what is actually violence.
Absolutely. Really well said, all of you ladies. Thank you so much for being here and being part of this conversation. It was most inspiring for me. I'm sure it was for the audience as well. Thank you very much. And we'll continue this struggle and this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank
Kaveri.
you very much for having us. Thank you so
Thank you
much for
so much.
having us.
Thank you.